At 6, Rishi Sunak's first full day as Prime Minister, as yet more of Liz Truss's plans are ditched. At his first Prime Minister's questions, he told MPs the ban on fracking is back, and he defended his reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary.
The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake.
He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election.
The Chancellor's long-awaited economic plans have also been delayed until the 17th of November, also on the programme. If climate change is not prioritised, we are all doomed. That's the dire warning from the head of the United Nations. A sharp rise in the number of people crossing the Channel in small boats. More than 38,000 have arrived in the UK this year. And millions of children used to watch this every day just before the 6 o'clock news. As the BBC turns 100, we look back at children's TV over the decades.
On BBC London, day one for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Top of the list that needs sorting, the economy. And disposable vapes are sold in their millions, but what's the cost of not recycling them?
Good evening. Rishi Sunak has appeared before MPs in Parliament on his first full day as Prime Minister and announced yet more unravelling of Liz Truss's plans. The ban on fracking in England is back in place after it was briefly lifted by the former Prime Minister. The government's economic statement, due to be delivered on Monday, has now been pushed back by almost 3 weeks to November the 17th. And we will have to wait until then to find out whether the state pension will still rise in line with prices, despite this being promised by Liz Truss. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak defended his decision to reappoint Suella Braverman as Home Secretary less than a week after she was forced to leave the role for a data breach, as the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused him of doing a grubby deal to win the leadership contest. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has the details.
He used to pop out of this front door when he was Chancellor. Rishi Sunak and the rest of us will now be getting used to him coming out of this one, next door. The new Prime Minister had a lunchtime appointment in the House of Commons.
Prime Minister, well...
Conservatives have found their voices and smiles again. Even the benches got a bashing.
Mr. Speaker,
Can I just say, don't damage the furniture. Cheer him by all means, but don't damage, come on.
May I welcome the Prime Minister. The first British Asian Prime Minister is a significant moment in our national story. And it's a reminder that for all the challenges we face as a country, Britain is a place where people of all races and all beliefs can fulfil their dreams.
But he then immediately questioned one of his first decisions.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Prime Minister! The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
This time last week, Suella Braverman was out as Home Secretary, having used her personal email account to send government documents to a Conservative colleague not entitled to see them. So Sir Keir asked, had officials raised concerns about Mrs Braverman getting her old job back? The Prime Minister ducked the question.
We can all see what's happened here. He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election.
Here was the reinstated Home Secretary turning up alongside her colleagues for the new Cabinet's first meeting this morning. Morning. New faces in new jobs, old faces in old jobs, and some old faces in new jobs.
Yesterday, he promised to...
Back in the Commons, another of Liz Truss's policies was being junked.
So if he is a man of his word, will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking.
Well, I've already said I stand by the manifesto on that. But
Liz Truss liked the idea of fracking in England, drilling into the earth to extract gas, but the Conservative manifesto, their promises at the last election, said no. The biggest political contest to come, though, is about our finances.
The Tories have crashed the economy and now somebody has to pay for their mess.
I'm the first to admit that mistakes were made, and that's the reason I am standing here. Leadership is not selling fairy tales. It is confronting challenges, and that is the leadership the British people will get from this government.
The political landscape has changed. This is the image the government wants to project, with pictures of people on the same side actually getting on. Well, for now at least. The new Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, even suggested today that boring is back, which is quite a claim from a bloke who was sacked in the summer, branded a snake, and then spent September lobbing rocks at Liz Truss's government. What is clear tonight is that there was a sense today of normal returning. Remember that? You had the Conservatives and Labour and others taking a pop at each other rather than visible Tory civil war. But it is worth emphasising over and over again that Rishi Sunak confronts huge challenges and big questions. That economic statement we were expecting next week has been pushed back to 3 weeks tomorrow, and so there are those big questions. Will, for instance, pensions rise in line with prices? Probably, but we await confirmation. Will all benefits rise in line with prices? Again, probably, but not certain. Two of many, many decisions that have to be taken, and taken quickly.
Chris Mason, thank you. So, as Chris was saying, the government's long-awaited statement on its economic plans is being pushed back to Thursday, the 17th of November. The Chancellor said it was prudent to allow more time to get the most up-to-date economic forecasts. Well, let's get more detail now from our business correspondent, Darshini David. Darshini.
Sophie, thank you. Yes, with the latest change of date, investors may be feeling the first chill of winter before they see that autumn statement. Crucially, can the Chancellor deliver stronger growth, fund tax cuts and get borrowing down? He says it'll be worth the wait.
Our number one priority is economic stability and restoring confidence that the United Kingdom is a country that pays its way. And for that reason, the medium-term fiscal plan is extremely important. And I want to confirm that it will demonstrate debt falling over the medium term.
Well, as it stands, the government faces a black hole, perhaps 30–40 billion pounds. That's close to what we spent on defence last year, and that's even after the reversal of most of September's tax cuts. There's also been recession warnings. What the Prime Minister admits is a profound economic crisis. Could a further delay to publishing its plans and the watchdog's assessment revive the recent damaging market turmoil? Well, maybe not. Take a look at this. This is the cost of government borrowing dictated by bond markets. Now, after soaring in the wake of that mini budget, as investors feared those plans were too risky, those rates have actually fallen back as the tax U-turns have underlined that this is not just a new Chancellor, but a whole new strategy. And it's this that could allow the government to unveil a brighter financial picture by delaying. If these rates are sustained, official projections could argue that the government's bill for debt interest may be up to £10 billion lower than it might be deemed now, when the forecast would reflect the height of the angst over the original mini-budget plans. Now, all of that could plug some of the spending hole that currently remains. And those lower bond rates could also spell a reduction in fixed-rate mortgage deals, signalling less of an economic squeeze on hundreds of thousands of households who'll soon remortgage. And this delay could have other benefits.
So there's a little bit more time now and a full autumn statement. That may mean more decisions can be made, and in particular decisions specific to individual departments, how much money, education, health and so on will get. That would have been really hard to do by Monday. Still hard to do in 2 weeks, but at least possible.
Well, the currency markets too have welcomed the opportunity for more detailed plans. The pound, you can see there, is up by more than 10 cents against the dollar from those lows that we saw after the mini-budget. But could the Chancellor use this extra time to explore wider options? Rather than cuts to spending on services, could the spotlight shift, say, to higher taxes on businesses who've benefited from the recent turmoil on energy and financial markets? Well, whatever's revealed next month, the Prime Minister knows economic stability means more than navigating the current crisis. It'll mean boosting long-term prosperity in a way that's evaded many of his predecessors. Sophie.
Darshini, thank you. There's been another sharp rise in the number of people crossing the Channel in small boats this year. More than 38,000 people have already made the journey to the UK, compared with 28,500 last year. And of the migrants who arrived here last year, almost none of them has had their application for asylum processed. The UK's asylum system is now costing more than £2 billion a year. Our home editor, Mark Easton, reports.
Wait, and go. Children pulled aboard an RNLI lifeboat from the English Channel just a few weeks ago.
Breathing.
Breathing, walking. Distressing images illustrating the challenge posed by record numbers of migrants trying to reach the Kent coast in flimsy boats. For a Brexit campaigner like Suella Braverman, who promised to take control of Britain's borders, every arrival is an embarrassment. But the situation's also a huge practical challenge for the Home Secretary, because currently her department simply cannot cope. On arrival, migrants are taken here, a short-term holding centre at Manston in Kent. Designed for 1,000, there were 2,800 people at the facility on Monday when the Independent Inspector of Borders paid a visit to the overflow tents hurriedly erected in the grounds. Today, MPs were told conditions at Manston were so dangerous the inspector had been left speechless and had written to warn the Home Secretary.
I spoke to an Afghan family who had been in a marquee for 32 days with kit mats on the floor, with blankets, for 32 days, and a Syrian family who'd been there for 2 weeks as well, the mother of who was terribly distressed because she didn't know where they were going. So this is a pretty wretched conditions.
Home Office officials say the nationalities of those crossing the Channel is changing, with Albanians now the #1 category. In 2020, just 50 Albanians arrived in small boats. Last year, it was 800. This year already, it's 12,000. And of that number, 10,000 are single men, representing more than 1% of Albania's adult male population arriving in the UK this year.
The rise has been exponential. And we think that is in the main due to the fact that Albanian criminal gangs have gained a foothold in the north of France and they've begun facilitating very large numbers of migrants.
The Home Office says Albanian crime groups organise travel for people looking to reach the UK. Planes bound for Belgium, they say, are arranged for the express purpose of getting people into small boats. The new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, wants many more migrants to be prosecuted for illegally arriving in Kent. She's also enthusiastic about the scheme to send asylum seekers to Rwanda and would actually like to see the scheme expanded. And she also wants to prevent the European Court of Human Rights from being able to stop flights. With the Rwanda scheme stalled in the courts and 100,000 people stuck in the asylum system, many migrants are being housed in hotels like this one in Scarborough. The cost? Almost £7 million a day. Hold the line. With government systems gridlocked, the RNLI keeps training crews for rescuing migrants from the Channel. There are no quick fixes to what was described to MPs today as a really dangerous situation. Mark Easton, BBC News.
The government is being warned that cuts to public health budgets in England will hit the poorest communities the hardest. Directors of public health say that after years of real-term budget cuts, any further reductions in funding will have a real impact on the lives of some of the most vulnerable. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports.
This is what public health in action looks like.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm from the Quit Smoking team.
Anthony is a smoker, but with a fractured foot and shoulders. He's now stuck in Gateshead's Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So Carol, one of the hospital's stop smoking advisors, sees a chance to help Anthony quit.
We can offer you some patches for your arm. And we can give you like an inhalator, you know, to...
Carol herself gave up smoking 5 years ago. She understands how hard it can be.
If I can do it, anybody can, and I did it.
And she fears what might happen if this kind of service didn't exist.
I just think people will die sooner because they're not getting the support that they need. And I think now if we're educating the grannies, the mothers, they're going to educate their children not to smoke as well, because it's them that's the future, isn't it?
Carol's work in Gateshead is funded by the council, but the money comes from central government, a grant to local authorities in England worth £3.4 billion this year. Rising inflation is eating into that funding. A fresh analysis of the public health grant shows that taking inflation into account, since 2015 it's been cut by nearly a quarter. Stop smoking services have been hardest hit, with budgets down by more than 40%. Money for adult drug and alcohol services has been reduced by more than a quarter. And sexual health services saw funding fall by more than 20%. Despite that cut, in Sheffield, those same sexual health services, which offer advice on contraception, have managed to drastically reduce the number of teen pregnancies. For Bethany, it's a vital resource.
Well, healthcare is a basic right. Everyone should have healthcare.
So cuts would mean what for you, do you think?
Well, it means that there'd be longer waiting times. It could be pushed back months, and then I've got a risk of being pregnant again, and like, I might not even be financially stable at that time, so I like having the right to choose.
And the local director of public health warns that in cities like Sheffield, already battling the negative impact of poverty on health, cuts have consequences.
We all have seen flatlining life expectancy, flatlining healthy life expectancy. That has very big impact on kind of health and social care demand, but it also has impact on the economy and our ability to work because people are poorly. So there's no slack, there's no room for further efficiencies.
The Department of Health and Social Care says public health grants for next year will be announced in due course. But the worry is that double-digit inflation will mean vital services will be lost and the health of the poorest communities will suffer. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Sheffield.
The time is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. Rishi Sunak's first full day as Prime Minister. He tells MPs the ban on fracking in England is back and defends his reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. And coming up, a blow for England's T20 title hopes as they're beaten by Ireland.
Also before 7, scam text messages are on the rise as criminals exploit the public during the cost of living crisis and charge in less than 10 minutes. The new technology getting electric buses up to speed.
The United Nations Secretary-General says we are heading for a catastrophe unless climate change is prioritised. In an interview with the BBC, Antonio Guterres says countries have put the issue on the back burner. World leaders will meet next month in Egypt for the next UN Climate Summit, COP27. They'll discuss further action to tackle climate change after a year of climate-related disasters and temperature records broken. At COP26 in Glasgow last year, a new global agreement was reached, the Glasgow Climate Pact, for countries to revisit and strengthen their current emissions targets by the end of this year. The plan was to reduce the use of coal, phase it down rather than phase it out. Money for developing countries would be significantly increased to help them cope with the effects of climate change and make the switch to clean energy. A commitment in 2009 to give $100 billion a year by 2020 to developing countries was missed and moved back to next year. Now developing countries want even more to help them recover from the effects of climate change rather than just prepare for it. Our climate editor, Justin Rolat, is in New York and dire warnings, Justin, from the UN today.
Absolutely, and we've got news in at Glasgow. Governments agreed to raise their climate-cutting ambitions every year. The figures are just in, and they show that just 24 out of 193 countries strengthened their plans. Now, take together all the pledges governments have made, and we see emissions rising by 10% by 2030. Now, the science is very clear. It says emissions need to almost halve by then if we're to avoid the worst effects of climate change. So Sophie, we are moving in the wrong direction. It has been a year of extreme weather. Devastating floods in Pakistan, drought in Somalia with millions threatened with famine. And record-breaking heat in the UK and many other countries. It's why the UN chief says climate is the most important issue in his in-tray. Do you think the governments of the world recognise that?
Not necessarily all of them at the present moment. It's very unfortunate that in many governments the pressure of the difficulties of the moment, and I recognise those difficulties. You have inflation, you have the consequences of the war, you have high prices of energy and foods, you have then social unrest linked to that. So there has been indeed a tendency to put climate change in the back burner, and that is why it is so important to strongly advocate to bring back climate change to the centre of the international debate.
There have been fears some countries, including the UK, have been rolling back on some of their climate commitments. Liz Truss advised King Charles not to go to the UN Climate Summit in Egypt, for example. Should the King go to COP27? Do you want to see him there? And what about the new UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak? Do you want to see him there in Egypt?
I would like to see them both. I mean, King Charles, we need to pay tribute to that, has been a constant voice raising the attention of the world for the need to be much more effective in relation to climate action.
Are you worried about the UK's commitment on climate?
I believe the UK people has today enough conscience about what climate change means.
Mr. Guterres, I didn't ask about the people, I asked about the government.
What I'm saying is that the governments are accountable to the people. And I believe the people will make the government accountable in a way that the commitments that were made will be maintained.
I'm sensing that you are slightly worried about the UK government's commitment on climate. If they need to be held to account by the people, it suggests that they're not perhaps...
There were some hints, but I hope that those hints do not correspond to the reality.
Some hints of a sort of loosening of the commitment.
Because things are changing also very quickly in the British political life, so let's be optimistic about the future.
But this year, we've had a taste of the kind of extreme weather climate change can bring. And the message from the UN today is clear. Unless we raise ambition in Egypt, the world will face far greater weather extremes. Justin Rolat, BBC News, the UN headquarters in New York.
The UK has some of the highest childcare costs in Europe. It means many working parents struggle to make ends meet, with some forced to stay at home because they don't earn enough to pay the childcare bills. Now, the biggest membership organisation for childcare providers in England, the Early Years Alliance, is urging the new Prime Minister to make the childcare sector a top priority. They say that it is underfunded and in the middle of a recruitment crisis. Our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley reports.
At these sessions in Manchester, a chance for toddlers to play and parents to have a catch-up. And it's not just crying babies keeping them awake at night, but the eye-watering cost of childcare.
More than my wage for the day to send them both to childcare, and I thought before I've even left the door I'm out of pocket. Every week I'm thinking, what can I cut down, or how can I cut down this and bills, and yeah, it's just endless stress, I suppose, now it really is.
Natasha has also had to make big changes. She was a geography teacher and is now a stay-at-home mum. The joy of having a family has meant giving up a job she loved.
For us, when we had one, she was in 3 days a week and that was £700 a month. Then for two, it was £1,400 a month. I just didn't earn enough for it to cover that, and so I would be going to work and losing money.
So we've got our baby shakers, which our little ones can grasp hold of.
Currently, there is no funding for nursery places for children under the age of 2 across the UK. Low-income families with 2-year-olds in England and Wales are entitled to up to 15 hours per week. all 3 to 4-year-olds can access up to 15 hours a week of childcare, which increases to 30 for working parents. Scotland and Northern Ireland have different entitlements. The government says it has invested £20 billion over the past 5 years to support families and is working on reforms to increase the number of childminders and the number of children that can be looked after in nurseries. This nursery in Salford says there also needs to be a focus on pay for those working in early years.
It's extremely frustrating because we're losing high quality staff who are going off to work in the local supermarket because they get a better pay. And yet really a lot of the staff in childcare, they're really passionate, they're keen to be here. We're primarily educators and we're here for the well-being of the children and the families. It's such a crucial role and it's so sad that it's not recognised as a profession.
The government is keen to get people back into work to help boost economic growth. But with some of the highest childcare costs in Europe, there is growing pressure to help parents who can't afford to work. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
The Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has said that LGBT football fans who attend the World Cup in Qatar should be willing to show some compromise. He told LBC that anyone travelling to the tournament should be respectful of the host nation, where same-sex activity is illegal. Labour called the remarks tone-deaf. Cricket now, and England suffered a major upset in the men's T20 World Cup in Melbourne after losing to Ireland. England were one of the tournament favourites, but the collapse of the top batting order and the intervention of rain led to defeat and dented their title hopes. Joe Linsky reports.
For Irish cricket, just to be here was a breakthrough. A World Cup match at the MCG with England, and they'd come to attack.
Gorgeous shot.
With each six, the Irish hope grew. They hit their way to 157. Not a huge score, but when England came to bat, they too got in a tight spot. The captain, Jos Buttler, out on his second ball. Now one of the lowest ranked teams in the tournament, believed. England's top batters collapsed. Moeen Ali came in at 67 for 4 and dragged them past 100. But based on Ireland's score at that stage, England trailed by 5 runs.
As the rain comes tumbling down.
The rain meant defeat.
Of course, we'd love to stay on and try and hit a couple of sixes if we could, but it got heavy. I think the game was lost before that point. We were a long way short of where we needed to be, and Ireland deserved to win.
Surreal, absolutely surreal feeling. It happened so quickly. I think T20 cricket, it's probably the best I've played in this team for a number of years, and we've never had a result like this.
It was the luck Ireland needed for a huge World Cup scalp. They'd never been so happy to get caught in the rain. Joe Linsky, BBC News.
Now here's a trip down memory lane for you. The Wombles, Play School, Blue Peter, the Teletubbies, just some of the popular kids' TV programmes that have been on the BBC over the years. As the BBC turns 100, David Sillito has been looking back at the most iconic shows that have been broadcast over the years.
Yes, it's Friday and it's Crackerjack!
Crackerjack, Bill and Ben, Andy Pandy, the Magic Roundabout. It is, for millions of us, instant nostalgia. And it's been recently discovered that children's programming goes back to the very beginning of the BBC. It's long been a bit of a mystery exactly what was being broadcast in the first few days, but researchers have discovered a reference to a very early broadcast.
And it's revealed that it all began with this line. High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince, the beginning of the first ever children's story read out on the BBC. And it was on the first day of broadcasting, but not in London, but in Manchester.
The BBC was at the beginning a collection of regional services, and it shows children were at the heart of the BBC from day one. And the programming often had a bit of an edge. The clangers had elections.
Now, you have heard the campaigns of the two political parties.
Bagpuss, social unrest.
Mice not work. Mice strike.
What's the day?
And this is Fluella.
Hello.
and it was often ahead of other programming when it came to representation. Floella Benjamin on Play School was a pioneer.
Do you know what time of year it is when the leaves start to change colour? I had to make a change and to get into a world where you showed people, children especially, that you can succeed, there is a future.
And programmes that seemed strange to adults, like the Teletubbies, were based on scientific research tracking exactly what attracts a toddler's attention. But this was a heyday.
I want to get down, Val.
Before streamers and YouTube, these days just 12% of 6 to 12-year-olds watch CBBC's TV channel each week. There are big questions about the future. But on this 100th birthday, it's a moment to celebrate some happy memories. David Soletto, BBC News.
Fabulous. You can see more on Kids TV, The Surprising Story on BBC One. That's tonight at 9 p.m. Let's have a look at the weather now with Louise Lear. Hello.
Hi there, Sophie. Weather is definitely coming from the square window today, and you can see there's our late October temperatures. This is what we should be getting with just a few days to come before we approach November. But look at what we may get over the next couple of days. Widespread warmth. In fact, we could see 22 degrees somewhere across southeast and eastern England. That's 72 Fahrenheit. The reason being the wind direction. It's coming all the way up from Africa, this warmer source right across the country. And it's not just affecting the UK. Actually, a large area of high pressure is keeping things very dry, very settled and very warm across much of Central Europe. But for us, don't expect it to be settled. There's going to be a lot of rain over the next few days. The next batch starting to show its hand over the next few hours, pushing into southwest England, Wales, bringing a lot of low clouds, some mist and fog as well, keeping it on the mild side across England and Wales. But clearer skies, single figures into Aberdeenshire. That's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing tomorrow morning. It's not going to last though. The rain will push its way gradually northwards, fragmenting showery outbreaks at times, some of it heavy, maybe the odd rumble of thunder mixed in there as well. Clearer skies with some sunshine following on behind, and it's in that sunshine that's where we might see that 20 to 22 degrees, 72 Fahrenheit. More rain to come though on Friday, still staying mild, but we will see some wet and increasingly windy weather moving in from the west. Gale force gusts on that band of rain. So the heaviest of the rain across parts of Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland, gradually into southwest Scotland, grinding to a halt on Friday into the far north. More sunshine, blustery winds easing further south, and more warmth to come. Once again, highs of 20 to 21 degrees. There you go. Sophie.
Incredible. Louise, thank you. And that's it from us. It's time to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.